Hi everyone, today I want to talk about what GitHub Actions is. GitHub Actions has completely changed how we automate and deploy code, and I think every developer should understand what it is. If we haven't met, my name is Samir Marin. I'm a software developer with 10 years of experience, and over the last 5 years, my work has been focused on what people often refer to as DevOps, infrastructure, platform engineering, cloud engineering. And over the last couple of years, I've set up numerous automations to help teams deploy code faster and more reliably. And it has never been easier to deploy code than it is today. And a big reason why is GitHub Actions. And today, I want to break down what GitHub Actions is, and then I want to go over a simple Hello World example that's going to give you just enough to understand the basic building blocks of GitHub Actions. If you want to follow along, you totally can, because GitHub Actions is completely free to use. All you need is a GitHub account. So what is GitHub Actions? I hear the term CI/CD get thrown around a lot. And while you can definitely use GitHub Actions to build a CI/CD pipeline, that is not really what GitHub Actions is. The best definition that I have personally found is that GitHub Actions is an automation platform and a framework. Let me break that down. Automation is when a system does a task that normally requires human intervention. So if we think of driving a car, humans normally drive cars. Now, when we think of self-driven cars, that's automation. And you may be saying, isn't code already automation? And while that's true, there's always more to automate, particularly all those processes around your code that have historically been done manually by developers. Things like deploying code, running scripts, merging code, releasing packages. That's where GitHub Action shines. It helps you automate all those processes around software development that are meant to get your code from your local machine out to production. And now, what about the framework part, right? I know framework, a very vague term. It's used very often in tech. We have front-end frameworks, back-end frameworks, database frameworks, and no one really ever explains what is a framework. Here's a simple take on it. A framework is just a set of tools and rules that help you build something faster without you having to reinvent the wheel every time. In GitHub Actions, that is everything that GitHub Actions gives you to automate your workflows. So that is a structured way to define your workflows, a simple format for jobs and steps, a marketplace full of pre-built reusable actions, triggers for every single kind of GitHub event and even events outside of GitHub, and a lot more. It gives you the set of tools to go from I want to automate this to now it's automated. Okay, now that we got the definition part out of the way, let's make it real with the Hello World example. Okay, so if you want to follow along, all you need is a GitHub account and a GitHub repository. GitHub Actions is completely free to use for public repos, and it has a generous amount of minutes for private repos. So first things first is we head over to any repo. Feel free to use any repo you like. The workflow we're going to build will not affect your repo in any way, so feel free to use even an existing repo you have. You can then delete the workflow after if you like. You can either clone a repo into your local machine, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is use the GitHub code web editor by switching the .com to .dev. Once you're in the repo, you want to create a branch. I'm going to create one, and I'm going to call it what is GitHub Actions. Now, I want to create my workflow file. This is a YAML file. All workflows in GitHub Actions are written in YAML. And the file needs to live under .github/workflows. If it lives under this directory, GitHub Actions will pick it up. Okay, so once we have the file open, there are three main components to a GitHub Actions workflow. Let's start with the name. Now, what you put here doesn't really matter. This is really for reference for when you go to the GitHub Actions console, you're able to reference the workflow. In the case of this workflow, we are going to call it Hello World because it's a Hello World workflow. Now, for those of you who may not know what a Hello World program is, it simply is a program that prints Hello World when you run it. So what this action is going to do, it's when it runs, it's going to comment on a pull request, Hello World. That's all it's going to do. It's simple, but it's going to demonstrate all those core components of GitHub Actions or of a GitHub Actions workflow. Okay, so the second component is the triggers. The two most common triggers are the push trigger and the pull request trigger. These are triggers that respond to push events and pull request events. And these are the triggers we are going to use in our workflow. And so what these triggers do is they either respond to a push event, and you can say the branch you want it to respond to. In this case, we're going to put the main branch, or it responds to a pull request event. And so what this means, it responds to any time we create a pull request or push to a pull request that is going to be merged to the main branch, because that's the branch we're specifying here. Okay, there are numerous other triggers that GitHub Actions provides for you. And if you're interested, I'm going to place a link below. The third component is the jobs. A job defines a unit of work. Each job runs on its own GitHub runner. GitHub provides machines for you to run your GitHub Action workflows, and each job runs in an independent machine. You specify the machine with the runs on. You can name a job whatever you like. It's really a reference to you for when you take a look at the workflow in the GitHub Actions console. And then the other part to jobs are the steps. These run one after another. The steps is where we write the logic to our workflow. In our case, we're simply going to have one job, which we're calling the Hello World job. It's going to run on Ubuntu latest machine, and it's going to have two steps. Step one is going to be the Hello World step. Now, what this step is going to do, it is going to save the output of our comment. So the output is simply going to be Hello World. So we're going to write this in bash, and we're simply going to save a bash variable called Hello World that's going to save a string that says Hello World. And then we're going to save this variable into a GitHub output so we can reference it in the next step, which is going to be the step that's going to comment on our PR. Now, we're also going to place an ID, as you see here, because this ID is going to allow us to reference this step in our next step so that we can use the Hello World variable in our next step. Okay, so the next step we're going to call comment on PR. Now, this step is going to be in charge of commenting on the PR. In this step, we're not going to write bash. What we're going to do is we're going to use a community pre-built action. This community pre-built action is called the Peter Evans create or update comment. So let's head over to that community pre-built action GitHub repo so we can see how it works. Okay, we can see that this community action comments on a pull request or an issue, which is exactly what we want. And here we can see the input variables. One of them is an issue number, which is one of the ones we're going to use so we can reference the PR that we want to comment on. And the second one is the body, which allows us to place what we want to comment on the PR. Okay, so let's head back to our code and let's place these two input variables. Okay, so whenever we want to place input variables into a community GitHub action, we use the with keyword. And first off, we have the issue number, which was one of the input variables we saw in the community action GitHub main page. And what we're going to do here is we're going to place the PR number where the comment is going to be placed. So to do that, we're going to use what we refer to as a GitHub expression. And we do that by opening up the curly brackets. And then we reference GitHub action contextual information. And the way we do that is we say github.event.pull-request.number. And so there's a whole lot of different contextual information that GitHub provides for us depending on the context of the event that triggered the workflow. And if you're interested to find out more, I'm going to place a link in the description below. Okay, so next up we have the body. The body is simply going to be what we're going to comment on the PR. And what we're going to do here is we're going to also use an expression because we want to reference the output from the previous step. So if you recall, in the previous step, we created the hello world variable and we set it as an output. And in this step, we're going to reference it. And the way we do that, we open up the expression, we then refer to steps, then .hello world, which was the ID we placed in the previous step, then outputs, because we placed this in an output variable, which allows us to access it here, and we called it value. So then we used the dot value to grab the value we saved in the output. And that's it. So we've now written our two steps. One of them is the hello world step, which simply creates a batch variable, places it into a output so that we can utilize it in the comment step to comment on the pull requests. And we're able to find the pull request we're going to comment on by using the GitHub action contextual information to grab the pull request number that started this workflow. Because if you recall, we have two events. One of them is a push event and a pull request event. And if we have a pull request event starting this workflow, we are then able to grab the pull request number that started the workflow. So there's one more thing we want to do, and that is add a condition on the second step. And this condition is going to say only run this step if this event is a pull request event. Because what's going to happen is if we run this step when it's not a pull request event, when we try to find a pull request number with the expression and grabbing the contextual information, it's not going to work because it will be a push event. And when it's a push event, that information will not be available because there is no pull request to reference. So we want to place this condition here to make sure we don't get an error when the event triggering the workflow is a push. Because if you recall, we set up a push and a pull request event. So we have to make sure we account for both cases. All right, now that we've done this, let's commit this and let's watch the workflow run in the GitHub Actions console. Okay, so to get it to run, we do need to make a pull request because we need a pull request event to trigger the workflow, or we need to merge. But let's do a pull request event first, see how it works, and then we'll merge and we'll watch it also run on a push event. Okay, once we create the pull request, this will trigger a pull request event and the workflow will run, and we can see it run in the console. Now, if we jump into our hello world workflow, we can see that the workflow ran. We have our two steps. The one step is the hello world step that simply sets the output variable for the second step to use, which is the comment on PR step, which then uses the output variable we set on the previous step and comments on the PR. And we can see that it commented on the PR hello world, which was the output that we placed on the hello world variable and used that in the body. Now, let's merge this PR and let's watch the workflow run on a push event. Now, as you can see here, the workflow has run in two occasions. One of them is a pull request event and the other one is a push to main. Now, let's take a look at the workflow that ran when we pushed to main, and we can see that in this case, only the first step ran, and that's because we have the condition saying that when it's a push event, the second step should not run. And that's to safeguard because it would be an error since there will be no pull request number available. Okay, and that's it. We have built a hello world GitHub Actions workflow that essentially commented on a pull request, hello world. And now to sum everything up, we said GitHub Actions is an automation platform and a framework. And so the automation here is the fact that we were able to trigger the Hello World program to run by a push to our repository or the creation of a pull request. That's automation because we don't have to manually trigger the Hello World program to run. And then the framework aspect was everything that was given to us so we could create this automation. This includes the workflow YAML file, the triggers, the jobs that run on GitHub Action runners, the expressions that we use that are provided to us by GitHub Actions, the contextual information that we use to grab a pull request number, and even the part where we set an output in a previous step to be able to grab it in the other step so that we can comment the hello world. This is all part of that framework. It's all that GitHub Actions gives us that allows us to create the automation. And so that's really it. That's all GitHub Actions is. It's an automation platform and a framework. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.